I eventually packed my belongings up and went to live my life at age 30 by myself in the woods. I was scouting an area that was in Delaware County, which was in the suburbs of Philly, looking for the perfect spot to spend my summer. After my long journey testing different areas, dealing with bad experiences such as my tent flooding after heavy rains, I found a huge hill that probably went up a few thousand feet. This hill was on a giant rock outcropping with many beautiful stones such as granites. I honestly thought I found the perfect camp secluded from everyone. The area was well planted with huge trees of many sorts, and it was surrounded by a large creek. So due to all these factors, I set my tent right on top of the hill. The tent I owned was a one-person tent, literally just big enough for me to sleep in. This was all I really needed. With the tent set, all I had left to do was create a barrier with local tree branches so I could keep out anyone and hide my tent. After stringing up a huge wall of branches in the area and putting trip lines around the campsite, I began living my life. Many days passed that summer before the incident that changed my life forever happened. Before I delve into this experience, I want to add that it would be nearly impossible for any dog or anyone to get up the hill. Someone would have to be extremely dedicated in finding this place to get to it. During my adventure living alone in the wilderness, my brother would occasionally meet me a bit away to drop off supplies such as beer, food, and water. On a beautiful summer night after it just rained very heavily, I was laying up on the hill right outside my tent. I was immersed in extremely dense fog. The whole area looked as if it was covered in a huge cloud. I was tired from a long walk earlier, so eventually when it hit around 10 p.m., I retired into my tent. I crawled in and laid down with all my equipment around me. It was extremely cramped in there. I zipped up the door flap and began relaxing. I started reading a good book when I noticed it was getting really late, so I got my flashlight out, put on my headlamp, and just relaxed. Periodically, I would text my sister to let her know that I was okay and just conversate about certain things. It hit around 1 a.m. when I just started having a very strange feeling. You know, a feeling something is wrong. I tried to shrug it off, but it wouldn't go away. I lay there with my headlamp fully illuminated. My tent had a tiny opening at the top with a mesh so you can see out of it. Other than that, you can't really see anything on the outside. As I was reading, I suddenly heard something run very loudly towards my tent. It stopped right outside on my left-hand side next to me. Whatever this thing was began loudly barking almost as if a massive dog is right in your face about to attack. I suddenly shuddered with fear, saying to myself, that can't be a dog. There's no possible way anything can get to my tent with my barricade and my trip line, or at least not without making an extreme struggle and lots of noise. In complete fear, hearing this beast growl and bark like a maniac, I fumbled to get my phone in a panic and started texting my sister saying, listen, there's something outside my tent and it's pretty pissed off. She texted me back by saying, maybe it's a dog. I knew no dog could get up this hill. It's impossible. If it's not a dog, then what the hell is outside my tent? All of a sudden, that thing stopped and disappeared after about 10 minutes. I sat there terrified and decided to dial 911 on my phone and hold on to it in case that thing came back. After an hour passed and nothing happened, I kicked off my shoes, cracked open a beer, and resumed reading, trying my best to relax. Let me just say I've been in the woods for 6 months straight before and never had anything like this happen. It was so chilling, I get sick just thinking about it. As I'm laying there, time started to pass by with no sign of the creature. I was too terrified to even look out the tent at this point, plus the ground was covered in fog. 3 o'clock rolled around. I firmly held the phone in my right hand just in case. All of a sudden, I was completely paralyzed. I lay there in a state of fear, unable to move any part of my body. I thought I was going to die. All of a sudden, I felt something grab me. Whatever grabbed me began picking me up and smashing me into the ground hard. This thing was so strong that I felt like a rag doll. It just kept squeezing me and shaking me as if I was nothing, then tossing me to the ground. I was shocked, horrified and confused at the same time as I can't see what is doing this to me. I looked at my phone in my hand, desperately trying to move my thumb to hit the dial button, but my thumb wouldn't move. I could hear this thing breathing very loudly, and it was making sinister growls. As this thing was beating me to a pulp, I could tell it was trying to get me outside of the tent. After struggling for probably 7 minutes, it suddenly stopped. I was able to move again. My thumb immediately hit 911. I got a girl dispatcher on the line. Right before I was about to yell for help, a thought went through my head. What do I say? I'm in the middle of nowhere in the woods and I was attacked by some dog monster ghost thing? She isn't going to take me seriously. I regretfully ended the call and started texting my sister. I told her about the attack and provided my location. I got no answer. I kept texting, no answer. At that point, I did the only thing I could do. I cowered in my tent for the next few hours, waiting for the sun to come up and not knowing whether this thing will return. Once it was light outside, I was able to muster up some courage and barely crawl out of my tent. My body was battered and in extreme pain. I was worn out. I started to look around my tent and nearby surroundings for any footprints or a sign something had been there. I came up empty. No lines were tripped, no branches were moved, and my tent looked undisturbed. It didn't make any sense as I was so beat up I could barely walk. I was so unnerved I immediately moved my campsite. I eventually got a larger tent. I don't know what was menacingly barking right outside my tent or attacked me that night. I don't believe it was a Bigfoot. The aggressive monstrous barking makes me think it might have been a Dogman. I'm not certain because I was attacked inside the tent while whatever it was remained outside. I now know there are apparently things out there that can attack you without revealing themselves or leaving any signs of having been there. I know if it wanted to, it could have killed me very easily. I have a feeling that this thing was pissed at me for tearing down the giant tree branches to fortify my camp. So to any of you who decide to camp in the middle of the woods, don't harm any type of tree or plant. You never know what might get upset. You may regret it as I did. This story was told to me by my uncle. This happened to his neighbor in the late 70s in Singapore. I will share his story from his perspective. During the time of this encounter, I was only in second grade. The government and corporations started constructions of various new tall housing buildings known as HDB and various bridges. There was a rife rumor going around during that time that this creature known as the Kapala and Jinn was air quotes employed or summoned by the rich corporations. This creature was going around HDB corridors and kidnapping children. It was said this kidnapping appeased this evil spirit and prevented a disaster for the constructed foundations. The rumor of the Kapala and Jinn even made the headlines of the newspapers during that time, and all parents refused to let their children travel to school alone. During this period of time, the police were not as technologically advanced and efficient. The crime of kidnapping was not uncommon in Singapore. I assumed it was just some kidnappers diverting attentions to supernatural beings. However, I was wrong. It was during a hot afternoon after school. I was doing my homework beside my window. Being the inattentive kid that I was, I stared outside and started to daydream. A side note for those of you not familiar with the Singapore HDB housing layout. The high-rise buildings are 10 floors high, with a corridor outside each house that links to a common lift. This means you will walk by your neighbor's door and window each time you come home via the lift. I was staring outside and noticed something that caught my attention. Opposite of my block, I saw a weird-looking figure. As my eyes adjusted, I took a closer look. My breath got caught in my throat, and I couldn't hear anything but my heartbeat. This thing I was staring at was very tall. It was extremely hairy and had a huge build. If I had to compare the build to today, I would say it was like John Cena, but with a lot of hair on the chest and arms. From my view, I noticed something peculiar about it. It had a dog head in place of where the human head should be. first thought this was a costume until I noticed a huge tongue sticking out. This thing was panting like an actual dog. I rubbed my eyes twice to see if my eyes were deceiving me. My heart sank when I saw this thing slowly proceed to stop by a window and reach one of its arms inside. Then it seemed to be trying to pull someone or something out. That's when I heard a little girl screaming for help from the window. I jolted back to reality. I started shouting as loud as possible, "Kepala Anjing! Kepala Anjing! Kepala Anjing!" I shouted at the top of my lungs and screamed for that creature to stop and let the little girl go. There was enough commotion that neighbors started peering out of their windows. Most of them saw what I was seeing, and they too started to shout at this thing and yell at the neighbors of the opposite block to help stop the creature from pulling the child. Many neighbors started to grab their cleavers, mops, brooms, and sticks. Then they raced towards this creature. I too grabbed my baseball bat and ran down as fast as my legs can carry. At this point, no one cared that there was a massive monster in the building. The only thing everyone cared about was to stop this thing from taking the child. However, when we got there, the creature was gone. The brother of the little girl told everyone that this thing grabbed his little sister while she was dozing off near the unlocked window. As soon as it grabbed his sister and he heard her screaming, he ran over and grabbed his sister opposite to the creature. This thing was trying very hard to quickly pull his sister out, but got too scared and let go after it heard the huge commotion and saw the numerous neighbors rushing it. He thanked everyone for helping and willingness to confront this monster repeatedly. Unfortunately, no one was able to intercept this thing as we all ran up the stairs. There were multiple staircases leading up, and no one was sure which one it took to escape. Those who remained at the opposite block claimed that this thing took off at an unnatural speed. Many of the men decided to search the entire neighborhood, find this thing, and kill it. But it had disappeared without a trace. Since then, there were no more kidnappings in the HBD structures. Regardless, I chose to always lock my window and doors once the sun set in case the Kepala and Jing were ever to return. There is a national recreation area in western Kentucky that also runs down to Tennessee called the Land Between the Lakes, or LBL for short. It is situated between the Kentucky and Barley Lakes, consisting of more than 300 miles of shoreline, 170,000 acres of forest, and over 200 miles of walking trails. It is currently a focal point for over $600 million in the tourism industry. Prior to 1959, the area was called Between the Rivers. That was before the Kentucky and Lake Barley dams were constructed, and before the Tennessee Valley Authority, an agency of the federal government, took over the land. The agency used its powers of eminent domain to buy and tear down all the houses, businesses, and community buildings throughout the entire area, forcing over 700 families to give up their homes. Back before the 1950s, it had always been a very rural area to live in, with farmsteads far and few between, and with no real town to speak of except up at the north end in Grand Rivers. It was in this town back in the mid-70s that I first heard of the beast between the rivers, or now known as the Beast of LBL. Some old-timers would sit on this long wooden bench outside the old IGA store that used to be the old country store for decades before the grocery conglomerate came to town. I used to hang around there on the weekends during the day and listen to the stories they would tell. These old men, most of whom who used to live in LBL before they were forced to move, had some very interesting stories to tell about the part of the country. There was talk of hauntings, Indian curses, mysterious lights over gravestones at night, old hag witches that lived deep in the woods, and more importantly, several tales of a wolf-like creature that stood on two legs that would come out of the thickets and attack their cattle and livestock. A creature that was taller than an average man by well over a foot, nearly 7 feet tall, and thick long hair covering its body, and a stench that matched that of some of the freshly opened graves that were discovered now and then. This wolf man left tracks like a barefoot man, but where the toes should have been, instead were paw prints. The head was huge and wolf-like in appearance, with an extra long snout and uncannily long, sharp incisors that glistened from the moonlight with saliva, along with eyes that, quote, radiated red like one of the hottest fires in hell, they'd say. It had long arms that ended with huge hands and long spindly fingers with long, pointed, dirt-caked claws. At night they would hear it howl, and at that warning, all would go out and tie up their livestock and even bring their most prized selections inside their homes with them. The sightings of the monsters were still frequent throughout the beginning of the 20th century, and the elderly group of the bench told of some unsettling encounters they or members of their own families had with it. Each one told stories of finding livestock slaughtered, ripped to pieces, and eaten up. Cows and pigs with their legs dismembered from the sockets. Even a few horses had met their end with savage attacks upon their bodies. A few of them discovered what they saw at different times when they caught glimpses of the figure by peeking out of the curtains of the windows into the night. One man said it jumped out one of his horse stalls one evening while he was putting up some animals. It stood in front of him and stared, breathing heavily. It then spread its arms out like it was getting ready to grab him, then tilted its head up and let out a loud howl. It then sprang past him and into the dusky shadows of the sunset. This particular man said he was so frightened he wet his overalls during the encounter. Another man said he never saw it, but would always hear its baleful wails frequently at night. Not like a regular wolf or coyote. No, he said. It was deeper, longer, stronger sounding than what would come out of any animal I ever heard. Another old-timer said his wife had seen it trying to get into the chicken coop, but it gave up after getting tangled in the chicken wire. They all had tales of someone's hound dog getting killed, ripped apart limb from limb, someone's pig or cow or chicken getting eaten, the mysterious footprints left in the mud, and the stench it left behind wherever it appeared. And more than one had the same story of listening to it walking across their front porches at night and scratching on the doors and walls, which would leave deep gouges in the wood. All of them agreed that this was not a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It would be only another year or two after hearing about this mysterious beast that I myself would encounter it at the home of my family member that lived in the same area. But this isn't the story I was wanting to tell you. This was just a brief introduction to the unwritten accounts of the darker side of LBL. A prelude of some sorts, actually, to the real story I will begin to unfold. I just wanted to lay some groundwork so you could get the big picture and form some of your own opinions and theories. About 22 years back to the early 80s, I used to work midnights at a gas station a few miles from the Kentucky Dam, which is a few miles from the beginning of LBL in Grand Rivers. And it was on one of these midnight shifts I had two visitors that would change my outlook on the subject of werewolves. This story was never in the newspaper or the news or had any media attention at all. It was kept hush-hush, and a sacred silence was demanded in all those involved. It couldn't get out, ever. It was a few weeks before the beginning of tourist season, and tourists were what locals survived on. They were the bread and butter. A story like this would be like screaming sharks at a Daytona Beach or child molester at Disneyland. The people would stop coming out of fear. I wasn't a witness to the fact, just a third person, making observations and having conversations with the individuals who were a part of the incident who were involved in the whole ordeal. They had just come from the crime scene down in the middle of LBL after being there for over 8 hours. It was around 3 in the morning, and they were taking a much-needed reality break. 2 officers of the law, 2 grown men who both appeared shaken beyond description. A mixture of fear and confusion, shock and disbelief emanated from them both. One was paler than the other, a deathly pallor over his skin, and it was this one, I'll name him Officer Adam to protect their identities, that had to sit on the curb at the gas pumps, head between his legs, and expel the last bit of his stomach contents. The other officer, I'll name him Officer Bill, came in for some coffee for himself and a cup of water for his partner, then rejoined Adam outside. There were no other customers, so I went outside with them to see if I could offer some assistance with the ill man. He gladly took the few rolaids I had extended in my hand. With his own shaky fingers, he struggled to get them into his mouth. For quite a long while, the only thing that was heard were the crickets in the nearby fields, the sounds of the bugs hitting the fluorescent lights above us, hanging from the gas station canopy, and the distant sound of highway traffic that was far and few between as it was in the wee hours of the morning. My mind was buzzing with various scenarios of the cause of their distress. A tragic car accident? Possibly a motorcycle wreck? A boating mishap with drowning victims? A murder? Maybe a dead body was discovered. I don't remember sitting down, but after about 15 minutes of this hushed stillness, I found myself beside them both on the curb staring out at the darkness of the nearby corn pastures, letting my mind paint pictures of imaginary traumas. Adam spoke first, breaking the silence of obscurity. I can't believe it. It's not possible. I just can't believe it. In a hushed agreement that was almost inaudible, Bill replied, I know. It is so unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this before, or even heard of anything like this before. I looked at Bill and then at Adam. They were both gazing, open-eyed, unblinking, out into the inky color of the night. Adam's bottom lip was trembling slightly, and it wasn't from the slight chill in the late spring air. Something had filled them each with a congested fear. After a few more moments of silent reserve, my patience was rewarded with some slow, fragmented descriptions of their past 8 hours. Bill turned his wide, azure blue eyes towards me. They were glazed and bloodshot, tired, frightened eyes. With a weary, shaken voice, he began to unfold the tale that would forever be embedded within my spirit. Why he decided to tell me, of all people, was beyond my comprehension. Maybe it was an avenue he felt safe to travel upon to get it off his chest, off his mind. They were both frequent customers, and we knew each other on the first-name basis, but to divulge such a horrid account of great magnitude, well, I can only say that the fear inside them both at the moment in time had to be released, eased, and extracted from their souls, or else they may have gone mad with unbalanced thoughts. Without interrupting, I sat in trance, listening to every word. They had gotten a call to help with an investigation at one of the many rural campgrounds down in LBL. The tourist season was about to start in a few weeks, so as usual, there were some early arrivals that had come to claim prime camping spots before the areas were overrun with tents, campers, and travel trailers. The sun was setting low in the sky when they arrived at the scene. Several other officer vehicles were already there, and there were many more to come, as they would soon find out. Many coming from other counties, and a few coming all the way from another state. Several of these to come were coroners from different counties. One coroner vehicle was already present, as well as an ambulance, which would prove useless as there was no one to save. The victims were already dead. Quite dead. A young married couple who had come down to take it easy for a few days were the first to discover the ghastly scene. Neither one of them wanted to stay behind while the other went for help, so they both nervously traveled to the nearest town, Grand Rivers, and called the authorities. They did not return to LBL. They merely gave the arriving officers direction to the area of discovery and rented a local hotel room. With the sun going down, it got dark pretty fast, so there was a flurry of floodlights from the cruisers being pointed in all directions, along with the excited movements of $50 flashlights being held by nervous, restless hands searching the trees, the ground, the leaves, the shadows. There was a parked motorhome at the site, its frame being lit by a campfire close by, a fire that had almost gone out on its own, but had been rekindled by the new crowd of men in uniforms so they could have some more light. The front and back doors to the home were open. One of the doors was hanging by one hinge in a crooked slant. Through the windows, they could see zigzag movements of luminosity as the beams from the flashlight searched the interior. Bloody handprints slid down the thin metal walls close to the front door, and more bloody handprints could be seen along the length towards the back door, their images dancing eerily in the firelight like some ancient tribal symbols. Adam and Bill did not want to imagine what was inside the motorhome, but then again, they would soon find out that it wasn't what was inside, but what was outside that would change their lives forever. There was already a crime scene tape placed in numerous scattered parts of the area, and little white flags on metal skates stuck into the ground marking evidence. Evidence of ripped clothing, bodies and body parts, separated limbs, a pile of bowels, piece of loosened flesh clinging to the muscle tissue. What used to be 3 bodies that just hours before had been a happy family on a happy vacation to create happy memories for years to come, a father, a mother, and a young son. This happiness was gone. Destroyed by a psychotic madman? Or was it men? A murderous rage had taken place, one so abhorrently appalling that there were few witnesses to the scene that had kept their composure or held their recently eaten dinners down. At first sight, the victims appeared to be butchered by some unnamely weapon, possibly an axe or a chainsaw. Upon further inspection by the first arriving coroner, the wounds on the bodies were determined not to have been caused by a sharp instrument, but rather by some piercing, well-defined claws, and other wounds by some kin, mordantly long and scissors. Could it possibly have been a wildcat, bear, or maybe wolves? The coroner shook his head in baffled disagreement with each guess from the officers. The claw marks, for instance, on the back of the father's corpse were distinctively made by 4 long claws with a smaller digit like a thumb on the side. Its span was wider than a man's print, wider and different than a bear's mark, with deeper, deliberate gouges in the flesh. Rake marks from an angry unknown source trying to grab its prey that was no doubt trying to escape. The wildcat and wolves theory was dismissed as the open wound marks were apparently made by a more grandiose animal source. The bite marks were much larger than any mountain lion, wolf, or coyote. Whatever did it had a longer snout and more sizable teeth. There were also indications in the larger areas of the cadavers of bite marks where the flesh were, meat and bone had been yanked away from the body. Like a human who bites into an apple and leaves the impressions of his bite and teeth marks, so were the open wounds on these individuals. Bears, well, they aren't native to the area, but who knows? Maybe a grizzly bear did sneak in some way, but that was very far-fetched. He would have had to travel several states and cross several rivers to even get close to the part of Kentucky. Everyone present was betting on the bear hypothesis anyway, and no one even thought of anything else to be the cause of such a savage attack. A bear. It had to be a bear. From the back door of the motorhome, an officer stepped down slowly, holding in his hand some type of garment. A dress. A small dress that would have fit a small girl of around 5 years old. He informed the onlookers that there were more little girls' clothes packed inside the couch. This meant there was a missing person or an absent body, a member of the family. They all prayed she was still alive somehow, hiding somewhere. A new search began. As time went by, additional law enforcement employees arrived, as well as a few volunteer rescue squad members. Groups were spread out and assigned areas to examine and explore. Another coroner arrived to assist in the identification and causes of death, and much later a third one showed up, this one from a nearby state. All types of samples were placed in plastic bags, marked as evidence, and carefully stowed away. As they were packaging up what appeared to be one of the father's arms, one of the doctors noticed something wrapped between the dead fingers. Some tweezers slowly untangled a clump of long gray and brown hair. This too was placed in a bag, marked and put away to be analyzed at a lab later. From somewhere near the nearby woods, about 50 yards from the campfire, a scream was heard. A man shrieked that turned to a long wail and then to a whimper. As others arrived, they could see by the gleam of the several flashlights that the cop was holding his hat in one hand and his light in the other. There was blood on his face, the front of his shirt, and on the brim of his hat. More blood could be seen dripping on him. It was coming from above. High in the trees, the flashlights swung, searching for the source of the mysterious bleeding. A very small hand could be seen dangling down from a tree limb way up high, as well as a slender, lifeless leg that still had a white sock on the foot. The missing child had been located. It had been Adam that the blood had trickled upon, hitting his hat first, making him look up, and then feeling the thick, cold fluid sprinkling his face, then sliding down to his neatly buttoned shirt. It had been Adam that had screamed. The little girl had apparently been carried up the tree and leisurely eaten upon or carefully laid across a large tree branch. More of the same long gray and brown hair was found sticking in the bark of the tree near her body. After about 7 hours, most of the officers were sent away as a new team of investigators arrived. They were told not to talk to anyone about the incident, especially not the media. I'm sure besides Adam and Bill, there were others who had to confess what they saw that night, if in fact this whole event ever really happened. Witnesses had to divulge the awful secret of that atrocity discovery at one of the campgrounds at LBL. After a month after sitting outside with Adam and Bill that night, they stopped in again during one of my midnight shifts. They were both rather more serious in nature, not like before the incidents where they would kid around while drinking the sodas and eating a snack or two. They had both aged in some odd way. Streaks of gray that had not been there before highlighted both of their heads of hair. Their faces had lines of worry and showed signs of stress. I would see them again many times afterwards, but on this particular evening, they informed me that they had gotten word about some of the lab tests that were taken that dreadful night. The tests on the saliva taken from the bite marks and from the hair found on the man's finger and in the tree bark came back with an unknown species origin. The closest animal that they could be compared to was that of a Canis lupus, aka a wolf. Whether Adam and Bill had played an elaborate hoax on me, I'll never know for sure. But their sincerity and fear painted a picture of truth in their eyes and actions. There are several more stories that I've heard about this werewolf over in LBL that have been told to me over the years since this particular incident. There are several groups of Boy Scouts that had seen it. Several more campers, fishermen, and boaters that had seen it from the safety of their boats floating in some of the many bays that touched upon the shoreline. Hikers and bikers have heard its howling and have seen something stalking them while they were on the rural trails, hiding amongst the trees and foliage. Hunters have run across deer carcasses that have been brutally torn apart. There was even a pair of curious gravestone rubbers. Gravestone rubbers are those who go out in search of century or more old tombstones, then make rubberings by placing paper against the coarse stones and using a piece of charcoal to run across it, capturing the images and dates from the stones onto the paper. These gravestone rubberers apparently had a fearful encounter with it at one of the old cemeteries. As they were leaving in their car, this thing approached them and shook the back end of the vehicle up and down. It then held onto the trunk lid of the car as the tire spun on the wet grass. It was so strong that only after it decided to let go did the Toyota successfully pull away. These two individuals didn't stop driving until they were about 40 miles away. Only then did they dare stop to investigate the damage done. I myself have seen the car, and it had massive scratches in the rear. The scratches were much too wide for any man to have made them. They looked like they'd been made by a heavy metal garden rake. But you will never read about it in the papers, or hear about it in the news, or get a confession from any law enforcement official or man of the office. The media will say it's a bunch of woo-ha or just pranks, silly stories, urban legends, lies, tall tales, and such. This is a tourist country, and that means millions of dollars to the area. So you can't scare off business, can you? And each had an encounter on the same night. This was my uncle's encounter and one of my third or fourth cousins. Although I never spoken with my cousin about this, his account was only what my uncle told me. This happened nearly 50 years ago, but my uncle still remembers it clearly. I'll provide a little bit of a background on the area and our family. We lived in the family farmhouse with my grandparents. The house was the last on a dead-end country road within a small community of about 8 or 9 houses. This community was referred to by the locals as Thames River Sighting, but really it had no official name. The name derived from the close-by station sign of the CN Railroad. Our family had a band started by my grandfather. He, my mom, uncle, and 2 cousins were in it. On this particular night, they had met for a practice, which by 11 or 11:30 was winding down. One cousin left, and the remaining stayed to help my uncle tear down and put away the equipment while my grandfather tended to the animals. The animals seemed to be very spooked and nervous. This wasn't out of the ordinary, as there was a pack of wild dogs that sometimes made their way through every so often. After concluding the teardown, my cousin left and headed home. My uncle left 10 minutes afterwards. This particular night had either a full moon or a very nearly full moon, as my uncle said it was a very bright night. As he was slowing down and approaching a stop sign, something in the field to his right caught his eye. There's something large and tall standing sort of hunched forward and staring intently in his direction. This happened just as he was slowing down to a stop and about to make a left-hand turn. His sight of this creature went from glancing to his right to over his shoulder, then to the rear mirror as the car stopped. He sat staring at this thing for what seemed like hours. All of a sudden, this thing broke into a sprint and rushed at the car. My uncle said he was like in a trance of disbelievement, like his brain could not comprehend what he was seeing. The field this creature was originally standing on was about 400 to 500 yards away from the road. This thing was covering that distance incredibly fast. Just a few seconds before it reached the car, my uncle snapped out of his terrified trance and slammed on the gas, peeling out of there as fast as his car could. He kept his gaze on the rear mirror the whole entire time. The thing was so close that the taillight was illuminating it, and my uncle saw it reaching out for the car. He said it ran on 2 feet, not on all fours or even partially on all fours. 2 feet. It had dark-colored hair, either brown or black, appeared to have the muzzle similar to a dog, had pointed ears on top of the head, and eyes that appeared to glow a dim yellowish orange. He said what terrified him the most was that he could tell it wasn't looking at his car. It was looking at him. My uncle raced home and called back to the farmhouse. He told my grandfather to lock the doors and stay inside. My grandfather was confused and asked why, but my uncle said just do it. He quickly mentioned he saw something in the field which he could not explain. Something dangerous. He told my grandfather to lock up and to be safe. A few days later at the next band practice, my uncle and cousin were sitting outside having a smoke. My uncle decided to tell him about what he saw. He was expecting to be made fun of or even be called crazy, but instead my cousin said he saw something that night on his way home as well. As my cousin was approaching a stop, something massive ran across the road in front of him, forcing him to hit the brakes and almost skid off the road. He said he only saw it for a split second as it was moving. From what he could see, it looked like a massive dog or wolf, but it was upright, running on 2 legs. He more or less described the same exact thing my uncle saw. Whatever it was, it covered a good 2 miles, which included navigating some dense wooded areas and a pretty steep-sided ravine in only a matter of 10 minutes at the most. That is very fast. There were reports of strange noises like growling, howls, or barks in the woods along the Thames River. Some of the farmers in and around the time of these sightings said some of their livestock were found dead and partially eaten. Everyone tossed that up to wild dogs that were around. By my uncle and cousin, no, that was no wild dog. Story 1. When I was a teenager, I went on a hike in south central Pennsylvania by myself in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a day I was playing hooky, so there was nobody else there at the small trail. At least that I could see. You had to drive there. There was no foot traffic. I was young, and while I was hiking up, I had been talking, singing, horsing around the whole time, totally unconcerned, yelling things off the top of the mountain and so on. On my way down from the mountaintop, I heard my dad's voice call my name and ask for help. I thought I was having a stroke and stopped. Then I almost started to follow the calls, thinking, what the fuck is my dad doing here? Did he follow me or something? And then I came to my senses and told myself, my dad right now is at work, sitting in his office like an hour or more away. I heard it 2 more times in the space of a minute or two, call me by my name and tell me to come here and help me with something. I have never ran so fucking fast in my life. I used to do this hike in bare feet, and I remember fucking my feet up hurrying down the mountain. I never went back, and to this day, don't know what the fuck that was. The place was called Tumbling Run, if anyone is curious. It's not even that out of the way, but nobody was there that I could tell that day. There's only one trail, so I would have seen someone else. Story 2. A few years back, me and a buddy of mine were doing Christmas tree removal services with the Boy Scouts, and we were tasked with passing out flyers to let people know how to prepare the trees for us to take them. Sometimes if the person wasn't home, we would just rubber band the flyer to the doorknob, hence why we did what we were doing. We were about halfway through our route, and there were a couple of houses on top of a hill in a wooded area in the neighborhood. Really not that uncommon in that part of the city. Super long driveway that split like a Y to the 2 houses. I couldn't see the car from the doorway. But anyways, as we walked up the path, both of us got some serious chills. Not like it's cold, probably a ghost chill, but like we were being watched by something really dark. We shook it off as just getting the creeps because the house was old and poorly lit. Once I got to the door, I heard something shout my name from what seemed like right behind me, and it didn't sound anything like my friend. I turned around and my buddy was walking down the path from the other house like 100 yards away. I ran over to him and asked if he had just called me. He was like, "What? No, why would I call your name?" Right when he said that, as if on cue, the voice called out again, this time saying both our names, and it seemed to be coming from the house I just walked away from. At that, we both hightailed it out of there and ran about a quarter mile before stopping to get into the car and proceed to the rest of the route from the safety of the vehicle. Story 3. I was walking back home one night after hanging out with some friends. I've never been afraid to walk alone in the dark. I'm quite tall and intimidating looking from a distance, and I always bring a pocket knife when I know I'll be walking in the dark. Anyways, I was walking past some woods on the way back to my house, and I heard my mother's voice call, "Gabriel, help!" from inside the woods. I immediately recognized her voice and turned to look into the woods. She kept calling my name over and over. I couldn't see anything. It was far too dark to see through the trees. "Mom?" I called back, heading towards the woods. She sounded like she was in trouble and scared. I assumed that she had gone for a run like she did every night and somehow got lost in the woods. Then I realized it couldn't be her. She had texted me only 10 minutes before, asked me to come home soon to watch my little sister so she could go on a run. I stopped dead in my tracks and called my mom on the phone. The voice in the woods still calling my name and getting more frantic by the second. She picked up and I immediately asked her if she was in the woods. She said no, she was back home with my little sister. I swear to God, as soon as she said she was back home, her voice stopped calling my name from inside the woods. I was overcome with a wave of dread and fear that I had never felt before. Something in the woods was trying to lure me in using my mother's voice, and it knew my full name, not just my nickname, which made things even scarier because the only person who calls me Gabriel is my mom. I immediately turned and ran faster than I've ever ran before back home. When I got back home, my legs felt like jello and my lungs burned. I opened the door and there was my mom sitting on the couch with my sister. I would think this was some sort of prank, but my mom isn't one for pranks, and even if she was, there's no way she could have gotten back home before me without me seeing her. My only question is, what was in the woods? Story 4. Hunting is a huge part of the culture in Hawaii, and kids often learn from a very young age how to hunt. My cousin, who is in his late 20s now and has been hunting for a good 20 years of his life, has had some strange experiences in the wilderness, but this one always stuck with me as the weirdest one. Have you ever heard of a calling spirit? I'm sure they exist outside of Hawaii, but the gist is, if you're somewhere like the woods or you're alone somewhere, if you hear someone call your name, you do not answer. Bad things happen when you answer. I'm going to write the story like how he told me. I was around 8 years old when this happened. When I had just started going hunting, me, my cousins, and my uncle went hunting one evening in Walua. By the time we were done, we were about a mile away from our truck. It was about 9 p.m. and it was dark. My uncle said, "I'm going to go get the truck. You kids wait right here." But my cousins wanted to go with my uncle. I said, "I'll wait right here. You come get me. I'm not walking." I was over walking. My uncle was like, "You sure you want to wait alone?" I said, "Hell no, I'm not walking. I'll wait." So he said he would be back in a half an hour with the truck. Not too long after they left, I heard something moving in the bushes. Then I heard my uncle's voice. "Hey, Kai, come on, let's go." I said, "Hell no, I'm not walking back." And then my uncle whistled. You know when you're out playing with the other kids in the neighborhood and your dad whistles for you to come inside, and you know when you hear that whistle, you better go fast? That's the kind of whistle it was. So I jumped up and started walking. My uncle was ahead of me. I couldn't see him in the bushes, but I could hear him because he was saying things like, "You just don't want to listen. You're going to get in trouble." Then he said, "Come on, let's go down here." He wanted to go into the bushes off the path. I knew something was wrong. I said, "But I thought we were going back to the truck." Just then, I saw headlights back in the direction we started. And then I heard my uncle's stereo blasting, the only song he ever plays when he goes hunting. I start running. I take off and something grabs my backpack. I fly my arm back and let whatever it was take my bag. I get to the truck and my uncle asks, "Where's your stuff?" I point back to where I was and say, "I was following you." My uncle turns pale and yells, "Get in the car now." I'm bawling, I'm scared. I know I messed up. I know you never answer when someone calls, but it sounded just like my uncle. He immediately took me to my other uncle, who blessed me. Till this day, when I go hunting, I never answer when anyone calls my name. Story 5. So I'm curious if anyone has had an experience where their name was called while walking in the country or woods. I had a spooky experience when I was 15. I'm 31 now, and I really have no rational explanation for this. I grew up in an actively haunted house, but I never felt truly scared until this happened to me. I don't tell this story often because it gives me chills. I live in rural eastern Oklahoma, and before I could drive, I used to walk to my horse pasture from my house every day. The property my family owned was about 380 acres of wood. We had no close neighbors except for my uncle and his family, who lived in the house on the same property that was about in the middle of my path to the pasture. My uncle and his family were on a cruise, so I was supposed to check the house and feed the cats, which was no big deal as it was on my way to the horse pasture. My yellow lab would always accompany me on my trips to the pasture, which is about a half a mile or so away, but was easy to get through to the property. So I fed the cats, checked the house, then I went on my way to the pasture. Totally normal at this point, nothing spooky. It's a sunny summer day around 4 p.m. So I'm on my way from feeding the horses. As I was cutting through the clearing around 50 to 60 yards in front of my uncle's house, I hear the most eerie, loud, reverberating cackle laughter. It was almost childlike if you're a child from a horror movie. It had the oddest echo. I can't even explain it. It wasn't a normal echo, and it sounded like it surrounded me. My yellow lab freezes immediately and gets his hackles up, and he starts growling. This is the world's sweetest lab, growling aggressively. I'm frozen in fear and every hair is standing up on me as well. Next, I hear Catherine, my first name I don't go by. Then a long Noel, my middle name I don't go by. It repeats this about 4 to 5 times. The Catherine sounds weird crackly, sort of like a bird. It was strange, and the Noel was loud and concise and sounded like my mother. Catherine, Noel, Catherine, Noel. Then the laugh again. My lab starts barking aggressively and won't leave my side. Finally, I get unfrozen from fear and sprint the rest of the way home while I hear it laughing. I refused to walk to the pasture for a while after that. I waited till my mom came home and from work and had her drive me. I told my mom what happened when she got home that night, and it worried her that someone might be at my uncle's house that wasn't supposed to be. But she checked and all was normal. I tried to tell her it wasn't a normal voice, but she isn't a believer in paranormal. Never found a rational explanation for it. We had no close neighbors. I've ridden the horses out there many times since with nothing creepy happening to me. It's 16 years later, and I'll never forget how that voice sounded, though.
Alright, so this happened a few years back when I was working as a deputy. It was late, close to midnight, when dispatch sends me out to this isolated house right outside the woods. Apparently a teenage girl had called 911, really shaken up, saying someone was upstairs in her house tearing the place apart. Her parents were out in town for the night, and she was having a sleepover with a few friends. I pulled up to the house, and from the outside, nothing looked out the ordinary. But when I knocked on the door, the girls answered, clearly scared out of their minds. They tell me that they've heard something big upstairs, and it sounded like it was destroying one of the rooms. I head upstairs, and right away I hear it, something heavy stomping around, crashing into furniture. I drew my pistol out, slowly opened the door to the bedroom, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a person, it was this thing. It was huge, covered in dark matted hair. It was standing upright, built like a linebacker, but even taller. And its eyes were red, like glowing red. It locked eyes with me maybe for 2 seconds, and then it just bolted, ran into the next room, and let straight out the damn window like it was a nothing. I rushed back downstairs, got the girls into my cruiser where they'd be safe, and then I took after this thing on foot. I could hear it in the woods, crashing through the brushes and growling. It sounded pissed. I followed it for a bit, but then I realized I had no idea where I was. I hadn't even told dispatch my exact location, and worst, I was standing out in an open patch of woods, completely exposed. Suddenly it hit me. This thing led me here. It wanted me to be at that spot. Unnerved, I turned around and ran back to my cruiser as fast as I can. Thankfully, it didn't chase after me. The girl's parents showed up while I was still taking statements. They were understandably freaked out. The next day I came back with another deputy to check out the place in daylight. On the side of the house, clear as day, we saw these huge gouge marks in the siding, like they were made by big claws or something. The marks went all the way up to the second floor. Whatever this thing was, it climbed up there to get in. We walked towards the woods, and I swear we both felt it, that feeling like we're being watched. It was strong, and then, no joke, we hear this thing let out a long, deep growl from somewhere out in the trees. It was almost like it was daring us to come in for it. We didn't. We left. The family never called again, no more reports, nothing. Just silence after that night. Okay, so this happened back in 1978 when I was 17, living in a farmhouse outside Iowa, Kansas. I'd just gotten home late from nursing school. As I'm climbing the porch steps, I hear something big moving in the brush. It didn't sound like a raccoon or deer. This thing sounded like it was walking on 2 legs. Then everything went silent. I leaned over my porch rail to get a better look, and I swear to God, something tall moved between the trees. I bolted inside and locked the door. A few nights later, during a thunderstorm, I was lying in bed when a lightning flash lit up the room, and I saw something pressed against my window. I thought it was my brother messing with me, but then another flash hit, and I saw it. It had a long snout like a wolf, only thicker, and it had 2 rows of teeth 2 inches long. Its eyes were glowing yellow-green. Then it raised its hand, not a paw, a hand with long curved black claws 3 inches long, and scraped the glass. I couldn't move. Then it tilted its head like a curious dog, snarled, and it flicked out this long black tongue. I nearly shit myself and took off down the hall. I told my boyfriend Dale. He laughed. "So you're being stalked by a werewolf?" But he let me study at his place anyway, saying his pitbull King would protect us. Nothing's getting past King. Yeah, well, something did. Around 2:30 a.m., I was at the kitchen table when we heard this deep growl. Dale froze. It moved so fast, started at the back door, zipped around the house, then boom, right at the window beside me. No way an animal can move this fast. King went nuts and bolted outside ready to kill whatever this thing was. Then came the screaming. Not human, but not like any animal either. Then we heard King yelping in pain. Dale and I ran, locked ourselves in the bathroom, and listened. This thing was tearing King apart, bones breaking, limbs snapping, blood splatting against the outside walls. Then silence. Then the growling started again, right next to the outside bathroom wall. It knew where we were. The house started shaking, plastered cracked, stuff fell off shelves. This thing was tearing through the siding, trying to get to us. Dale starts yelling prayers, and I was crying. We had no way out, no way to fight back. Then sirens. Somehow cops showed up. Probably the neighbors called them from the noise. They found blood everywhere. King was in pieces. The back of the house was shredded like paper. But that thing, it was gone. I was around 7 years old, staying the night at my grandparents' house in Mississippi. I'm 36 now. It was a normal evening. Dinner, a bath, then sitting around while my grandparents relaxed on the screened-in porch. The sun had just set, that twilight time when it's dark but you can still see shapes. Then out of nowhere, I heard a loud slap against the trailer across the street. Their living room light flicked off, and then the kitchen light came on. That's when I saw it. A massive, hairy thing standing at the window. This creature, man, I'll never forget it. It had the face of a giant baboon, but its body was like a gorilla's. Huge shoulders, thick fur the color of a silverback, and the arms so long they hung past its knees. Its face was dark, leathery, with deep-set eyes. The old woman who lived there, a tiny Native American lady, walked up to the window like it was nothing. She stared right at this thing. She then sucked in her cheeks and blew out twice like she was signaling it. Then she turned around, opened her front door, and set out 2 animal traps, one with the cat, the other with the raccoon in it. That's when another creature started coming out around the trailer. This one moved like a goddamn spider. It crawled around the side of the trailer on all fours, low to the ground, but not quite touching it. At first I only saw its head and one arm slinking around the corner. Then I realized it had breasts. It was a female. Its fur stood up along its back like a dog warning you off. It snatched those cages and then disappeared back into the dark. The bigger one at the window let out a grunt and followed. This old lady was trapping animals and feeding these things. My grandparents? They just sat there whispering like this was normal. They didn't even bat an eye. Later my mom told me those things have been around since she was a little girl. Folks around those parts are used to seeing these things regularly. The story I'm about to share is something I've kept buried for over 40 years. It happened back in October of 1979 during my second year working for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. I never told a soul, not my supervisors, not my coworkers, not even my family. Only now, Facing a terminal cancer diagnosis with just a few months to live, do I feel it's time to come clean? This is my deathbed confession. I was on one of my usual morning fishing trips out at land between the lakes, a place I went often to unwind. It was around 7 or 7:30 a.m. when I was slowly heading back to shore. That's when I saw a campsite off to the right and noticed a dark figure nearby. At first I couldn't make out what it was, but then it stood up. What I saw next chilled me to the bone. The thing was covered in hair, standing on two legs, and looked like some kind of twisted mix between a dog, a lion, and a hyena. It had pointed ears, human-like hands, and a build that is said it was made to hunt. It moved like a predator. Then a man and a woman stepped out of that tent, likely hearing my boat. I tried screaming at them, waving, yelling, warning them, but they just waved back thinking I was being friendly. I kept shouting, "Over there! Over there!" But they didn't notice what was coming at them from the side. That thing, it charged them, and it didn't just attack, it slaughtered them, right in front of me. It was fast, brutal. I couldn't do anything. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I even pissed myself from the fear. I've never seen anything like it before. That thing knew I was there, watching it, but it didn't give a damn. I just drifted in my boat, in total shock. Hours passed before I mustered the courage to head back. Afterward, I kept checking the newspapers, waiting to see something about the two campers unalived at LBL. But nothing ever showed up. No investigation, no reports, no follow-up. It was like it never happened. I truly believe it was covered up. The department didn't want that kind of news getting out, not with tourism and camping being such big parts of the area's economy. And I myself couldn't afford to lose my job or put my family at risk by speaking up. Now that my time is almost up, I needed to speak out. People deserve to know what's out there. Whether you believe me or not, I know what I saw. I'll take the truth with me to the grave.